Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now on paper, Elden Ring's system requirements seem fairly tame. According to Steam, the minimum suggested specs consist of a 6-core i5-8400, which came out in late 2017, as well as a 3GB GTX 1060, which released in mid-2016. This combo will struggle to maintain smooth frame rates in some of the latest games, but let's see how sensible of a suggestion this hardware is for one of the best action RPGs around. I should mention that 12 gigs of RAM is also suggested, but this seems like an unlikely configuration for most users, so I've tested with 16GB in dual channel to start with, as well as 8GB later on. First, we'll start with the low settings to try and squeeze the most out of this configuration and hopefully hit somewhere near the game's default 60 FPS cap. I chose the low preset and didn't change anything else here. The anti-aliasing option remained off by default as well. At the low settings, the CPU and GPU combo seems fairly evenly matched. Neither one is the definitive limiting factor, so to speak, and while our specs can't maintain a solid 60 FPS here, we don't come far off overall. Despite being out for a while now, I've not progressed much at all in the PC version, so performance is of course subject to differ depending on where you are within this vast map, and I can only comment on these specific areas that you're seeing today. This should give you a general idea of what to expect though. The reason I'm covering this now is of course because of the new DLC, which has seen Elden Ring shoot straight back up into the top 10 most played games on Steam. I'm sure there are a lot of new players included in these stats, so hopefully a video like this will help you figure out if your machine is up to the task. Plus, I've been meaning to get back into the game on PC because I've dedicated many hours to it on PS5. With the low settings then, with this minimum suggested hardware, we are getting 58 FPS on average, 45 FPS as a 1% low and 30 FPS as the 0.1% number. Fairly consistent to be honest after my half-hour benchmark. I'd recommend sticking to low if you want as close to 60 frames per second as possible, but you can retain 1080p. But what if you want to turn up the visuals and are happy with a plus 30 FPS figure instead? Well, we can actually dial things up to high. I chose the high preset but turned off motion blur and depth of field as a personal preference. Choosing high with the i5-8400 and 1063GB knocked about 10 FPS off the average number, and the percentile lows were of course affected too. The game still felt okay to play, but the performance dips were definitely more noticeable, and here it's clear that the graphics card is the limiting factor. Nothing off-putting in terms of performance really, with the numbers coming in at 49 for an average, 38 for a 1% low, and 22 for the 0.1% number. Again, this was after half an hour of gameplay, and performance will likely differ depending on where you are and which enemy you're taking on. I said at the start about testing 8GB of RAM as well. This time around I switched to two 4GB 2666MHz modules and kept things at the high settings. Surprisingly, 8GB of RAM didn't devastate performance and the average number wasn't too dissimilar. Of course, losing half the system memory will affect the percentile numbers a bit more, and progressing through the game may cause further spikes, but again, after half hour of gameplay exploring the same areas and fighting the same enemies, Elden Ring seemed to hold up with just 8 gigs of DDR3. But there we are, short and sweet. Elden Ring runs fine with the minimum system requirements, and you can even turn things up past low if you are happy with less than 60 FPS, but more than 30. These specs are pretty spot on. Some games are barely playable at sub 1080p with minimum suggested requirements, so it's good to see that this isn't the case here, but remember, there may be some areas of the game that will be a lot more demanding than this and could struggle on this hardware. It's the same with any title, really. But I hope you've enjoyed this one. If you did, leave a like down below. Thanks for watching as always, and I'll see you all again soon.